Hi there, Inky Stampers. Today we're going to show you how to make the Lift Up Pop Out Birthday Birdie card. This is a wonderful variation using our never-ending square die in the Crafty Cuts collection. As you can see, I've already run my copy paper and die through a die cutting machine and removed the largest piece from the die. I'm opening the piece with the middle folds facing downward, and we're going to use this piece to create the pop-up mechanism for the card. You can see the score lines marked in square shapes all around the piece, and what I'm doing here is folding the right column inward using a valley or downward fold. Then I'll do the same with the left column, folding it inward to make a rectangle shape. And I'll press on my fold marks so they're nice and creased. Once I've folded those two sides inward, I open them back up, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the top and bottom rows of the piece, turning the top row inward and then the bottom row inward, pressing down to crease those folds, and then opening them back up when I'm finished. And this is what I have so far. Now I'm going to make mountain folds in the squares that are adjacent to the upper left and lower right corner square. Notice how I'm using the score lines of the squares as my outlines for folding each adjacent square in half, with the fold pointing upwards. Now I'll do the same thing with the two squares that are adjacent to the lower right corner square, again pulling the score lines toward each other and creating a mountain fold in the middle of each adjacent square. And there are my mountain folds. Next, I'll turn the piece over and place double-sided tape in the squares that I just folded. Right now I'm using double-sided tape because it's a little faster for demonstration purposes, but you might also want to consider using score tape for its extra adhesive strength. Once adhesive has been applied to the folded squares, I'll pull those inward and attach the halves of the squares to each other, making sure to press neatly along the fold lines. Just straightening this back off. This will give me a square shape, which I'm going to turn over so that you can see the front side again. I'll push the flaps outward, away from the corner squares. To repeat, I don't want the flaps facing inward toward the corner squares, but rather in the opposite direction, pointing outward and flat. Then I'll go ahead and tape down those flaps. Again, this is double-sided tape, or you may wish to substitute score tape or even liquid adhesive. Just make sure not to have any extra adhesive extending past the flaps. Go ahead and tape this last flap outward. And now I'm ready to start the second set of folds. I'll fold the piece in half again, bottom over the top with valley folds, open it back up, and then I'll fold the piece sideways with valley folds, making sure to get it nice and straight and even, creasing down on those folds, and then opening it back up again. Now I'm going to make mountain folds diagonally across one pair of corner squares. I want to ensure that my folds are straight and even before I press down. And this will give me the completed pop-up mechanism. To make it work, I can close it back up along the valley and the mountain folds that I just made so that it turns into a triangular shaped piece. You can see how it opens up into the pop-out, which will eventually be adhered to the inside part of the card. At this point, you can go ahead and flatten out the piece again, and then stamp and color your images and sentiments as desired. So let's review. Once the piece is at this stage, it's ready to stamp and color as you wish directly onto the piece. Now, if you happen to see one of the sample cards that we made at your local store or at one of our retail conventions, we actually made a slight addition for production purposes. We took a 4 1/16 inch square piece of copy paper and cut out a 1 5/16 inch square in the center. It was stamped and colored, and then we folded it just like before, in half up and down, in half again side to side, both with valley folds, and then mountain folds diagonally on one pair of the corners. The reason we did this was to create a stamped overlay for production purposes, which you can do if you want, but we just didn't have time to hand stamp and individually hand color every single one due to time constraints. So once we had the pre-printed overlay, we adhered it onto the mechanism, and this is what the mechanism looks like with the overlay. To insert this into a card, I'm taking a 2 1/4 by 2 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock that's been stamped with my images and colored and scored at 1.5 inches from the top. I'm just putting a little piece of double-sided tape at the very top center of this piece. I want to make sure my pop-up mechanism is facing upward. I put it back into its closed position, and then I place it onto the upper part of my Birdy piece, making sure that when it opens, the Birdy will be positioned to show through the square. So once that's in the right spot, I'll go ahead and turn over the piece, and you can see there's a lower section and an upper section with the pop-out mechanism attached at the top. What I want to do is put only double-sided tape or score tape into the upper portion of this piece, which is everything above the score line. So in other words, I don't want adhesive below the score line, but I can go ahead and put it all over above the score line. Then I'm going to set aside this piece for the moment. Here's the base piece and cover of my card. The base piece is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and the cover is 3 3/4 by 5 inch cardstock that's been scored at 1.5 inches from the top. I flipped it over, and now I'm putting adhesive onto the short side of the score mark. Then I'll turn it back over and place it onto my base piece. Go ahead and position that down and then press down, and you can see here's my lift up flap. Once that cover panel's ready, I'm going to grab my pop-up mechanism piece that I just taped a few moments ago, keeping it in the folded position with the adhesive facing the back. I'm going to place the fold line of the mechanism just about 1/8 inch above the fold line of the cover flap and press down to adhere that tape. Now I'm putting a bit of double-sided tape just in the upper corner of that top square. Holding everything in place, I'm going to close up the cover panel to adhere that taped area onto the base piece. And there's my lift up pop-out card doing its thing. To finish it off, I'll take a 1 by 2 1/4 inch piece of cardstock, which I've scored at 3/4 inches, to make a closure flap. I'll put some adhesive on the larger side of the piece, place it behind the base of the card, and then to hold the flap shut, Tombow makes these hook and loop fastener tabs. So I've taken one and cut it into thirds, and I'm just using one of those portions. I'm going to take that piece and place it onto the bottom of my cover panel, like so. Then I remove the little release paper, and I'm folding up the closure flap so it sticks. And voila, my project is complete. Thanks so much for watching, Inky friends.